Time for another farm system here on the call up. But if you're looking on or watching on YouTube, you might notice that's not Jack McMullen. It's actually Elijah Evans, who has been the mastermind behind our social media push, but also one of the best on the Chicago White Sox prospect front. So felt like we had to bring Elijah in to break down this Chicago White Sox farm system with me. He also helped me put together all these write-ups. So Elijah, it's so awesome to have you now on air with all that you've done to help us grow this show on the social side. And I know we've always been talking about that on here, but I don't know if people realize, maybe they do. I know if they're White Sox fans that listen to the show, they definitely do, but they may not realize that when you're not helping us grow this show and doing an incredible job on social, you are breaking down the White Sox farm system with the best of them for future Sox. So I'd be remiss not to have you help me break down this system. And you did an amazing job, and I'm excited to chop it up with you. So thanks so much for taking the time, man. And I know you got a flight to catch in about an hour and change. You're going international, and I know you and I could easily go 2 hours. So we'll need to have some good tempo here. But I'm really excited to chop it up and talk White Sox prospects with you.
Yeah, 100%, Aram. It's a pleasure to join you. I'm excited. I know we talk all the time about prospects, especially on the White Sox side, right? But it's a different thing to be, on air and joining the call up and just getting to experience, going through a farm system with you, because you do this all the time, right? You do all these systems every year. You go in through the farm systems, and like you said, the Sox is that's my passion, right? That's my baby is following White Sox prospects, just like all minor league prospects is yours. So I'm excited just to dive into it and go through it, because like we've talked about, this season's been ugly, right? But on the bright side, this is a better system than it's been in quite some time. The past 2 or 3 years, we've gone through this system and been like, oh, there's 2, maybe 3 players that we're really watching. And right now, we had to talk about some guys, right? Like we had to make decisions on who was making this top 15 and who was entering the top 10 range, right? Like there's some legit decisions here. So I think that's something that we haven't had the luxury to discuss in the past few seasons. And now I get to join you and actually talk about, a pretty solid farm system, all things considered.
And I think a great point to that, we're going to get to the names to watch, but like the fact that a disappointing first round pick is already forced out of the top 15, one side of that coin is that he's been that disappointing, but the other side is like, hey, there's other players that are good and we're excited about, and that others are excited about, that just grab spots in the top 15. I can't tell you how long Jacob Berry was hanging around the Marlins top 15 just because it was almost just as a result of not really having any other options. It was kind of by default. But now with what the White Sox have been able to do, bringing in prospects and also just, I think, seeing certain players take a leap and also, just adding a few guys through the draft that we'll talk about, the system definitely has gotten a lot better. And you can see some pieces that definitely project moving forward. And again, before we get right into the names to watch and everything, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can follow along. Some of these write-ups are not complete. It's not published yet, but by the time I think you're listening on audio, it'll be linked in the episode description and the full article will be live. But just in case those that are watching on YouTube, there's a couple write-ups that Caleb Bonnemer, which we're going to get to, that I just have to dig into deeper archives for videos and things like that. So lagging a little bit behind there, but I do want to get into the names to watch in a second. Before we do that, I just want to remind, if you somehow are a White Sox fan who found this episode on YouTube or whatever it may be and don't know about Future Sox, be sure to go check that out. Website, podcast. Again, there's nobody that's breaking down the White Sox farm system better than they are doing it right now. But Elijah, let's jump right into the names to watch, because as you mentioned, I think if we did this a year ago, there's not that many fun names to watch. And now, aside from the top guy who I very much wanted to have in the top 15, but the more I just thought about it, I'm like, all right, let's just wait. Let's not make it about me. And if he performs well moving forward, which we'll talk about in a second, and Sam Antonacci, he can be in the top 15. But the fact that the second player that you're going to lead us into, and Jacob Gonzalez, is not in the top 15. Again, it's frustrating, I think, from his performance perspective, but I also think it shows there's just the talent in the system that guys can quickly get squeezed out, even if they have the draft pedigree.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it shows the depth in general. And I think, Antonacci is a great example where, like, you were really high on him as we've been talking through this. You were like, this is a guy that you kind of have ID'd as someone you really like and higher than the consensus, right? I think this is someone who's not even a top 30 pretty much anywhere. I think he was just outside the top 30 for Future Sox even, right? But like, he's a month into his professional career and you're looking at a guy who is getting on base all the time. His contact rates are insane. I mean, he was a JUCO guy turned into D1 at Coastal, just insane batting average throughout his entire college career, right? And he's someone who is taking pro at bats quicker than almost anybody else from that draft class, right? Like he's immediately in pro ball and taking at bats that show you a guy that should continue to progress, that is going to fly through the system, frankly. He's someone that, it can play all over the infield, right? Good approach, walks a lot, makes great contact. You're not going to see a ton of impact. I think that's part of the reason. Like, I think if he had, belted 5 home runs in the past few weeks, you might have just said, screw it and put him on the list, because he does have an insanely good hit tool for his age and his level of development, right? But at the same time, the impact is definitely capped. He's not going to be a guy that hits much for power, but, a lot of singles, a lot of walks, good defense overall. And then you mentioned Jacob Gonzalez, right? Who it's like, yes, it's been a rough start for him to his career generally, and it hasn't been what the White Sox have hoped since drafting him last year. But at the same time, like, this isn't someone we're forgetting about, right? He's already in AA in his first full professional season. You're not just writing him off entirely. He had some things he had to fix with his swing. We saw him make some really good adjustments at the beginning of the season, and then he looked like he was figuring some things out in high A. Kind of gets probably, I think because he's a college guy, because he's a first rounder, they wanted to move him to Birmingham to AA as soon as possible. But you probably should have given him even more time, frankly, to keep working on what he was doing well in Winston. And then he goes to Birmingham, and it's been a struggle for him, right? Like, it has been a struggle for him. He's grounding out a lot. Generally, his at-bats are good at-bats, right? He walks a lot. He's patient at the plate, but he has a lot of at-bats that end up in just soft ground balls as opposed to like impacting the ball consistently.
Well, and what's interesting with Gonzalez is, you mentioned it, and I saw it even before the season. Definitely improved the setup, and definitely improved, I think, some of the moves pre-swing and all that good stuff. And you saw that in high A, as you mentioned. The Southern League was just a graveyard for guys this year. So I can imagine where you just kind of see those things come together for you, and then you get thrown into this environment where it really suppresses the offense. It's going to be pretty hard to build on what you have done. He did start to kind of hit his stride in August, relatively speaking, where I think he was putting up slightly above average numbers for the level. So it would be silly to write off a 22-year-old Jacob Gonzalez, who also, won't turn 23 until the end of May next year. So still young, even on the college side. You mentioned the approach that does help kind of solidify his floor. He can pick it at shortstop well enough. So that part helps also. And it would be nice if you can lean into a little bit more power, just so you can like palate the inconsistencies offensively. But I think that kind of is the problem, as you mentioned. It's not really the feel to hit; it's the getting your best swing off more consistently, and hopefully he can do that. The approach definitely helps, and I think the fact that you even just saw a little glimmer of hope. It wasn't like he got his doors blown off again in high A. Then you'd start to be concerned. Like, he showed good things, then the next level really kind of hit him hard. So we'll see if he can kind of make that adjustment again and build off of that, but still has time on his side. One last thing on Antonacci, probably one of my favorite swings out of the top, besides the top guys in the system. But you mentioned just the lack of impact is kind of the problem there, and that's why he's not in the top 15. Also, college bat in low A, got to take the numbers with a grain of salt. But when you're running a chase rate that's like around 10%, and the contact rates are elite so far, and then you just watch what he is doing in the box. I love the operation there. I'll bet on that hit tool just continuing to translate, but then it's what does the rest of the game look like for him? I'll let you just walk us through the rest of the names here, and then I'll just fill in, wherever I feel like I might have some extra things to add before we get into the top 15.
Yeah, we can fly through some of these guys. I mean, Kai Bush, White Sox fans are really familiar with, right? I think he got away with a little more than his stuff indicates at AA this season, right? Like, this is a guy who was able to pound the zone and put up great numbers in the first half of the season in Birmingham. The stuff kind of, as he's gotten to AAA and then made a few big league starts, right? Like, the stuff doesn't play as well. So I feel like he's kind of trying to pick his corners a little more, which is resulting in the walk rate going up like it was last year. So, left-hander with pretty average stuff around the board. He can eat some innings. I think he's someone that you're hoping is a back end starter, but is probably more of a long reliever at this point, right? You can see him in some starts. He's had some good games, right? Like, he had a game in Chicago where he was just finding a way to force ground balls and to make an easy contact, right? But at the same time, does allow some pretty hard hit balls sometimes when he's not around the corner of the zone. He gets hit hard, but then when he's sometimes trying to pick his corners, he can result in too many walks. He had a few games in Chicago where he was walking a ton of guys. So kind of a well-rounded left-handed pitcher. But the thing with him is I don't know right now if he has a true plus pitch, which makes it hard to kind of see him as an every rotation starter, right? So that's a depth arm, I think, someone that you hope is a big league piece, but not a ton there in terms of your high level projection. And then you go down. Go ahead. You got.
I was just going to say the only thing is I wish he got lefties out a little bit
Yeah,
better. Like
exactly.
if he wasn't a reverse splits guy, by the way,
Right.
lefties 776 OPS across all levels this year, righties 589. Part of that coin, you could say, okay, well, he gets righties out, so
Yeah.
maybe that can help him as a starter. But assuming that it's back end at best and probably a depth arm, you'd like to see a guy that could probably get lefties out and you could just settle into that role. So that's the one thing. But 24 years old, did show some
Yeah.
good things, and again, that very pitcher friendly Double-A Southern League where we have to take some things with a grain of salt. But this is a guy that should have a big league role in some capacity and has flashed some good things. I agree.
Yeah, 100%. William Bergoya is an infielder who was acquired from the Phillies this deadline, right? So just kind of a new add to the system. And this is another guy where it's like, yeah, he might not be a top prospect, but it's a really good depth to add to the system and a young player that you want to be adding. And for a Tanner Banks, right? You added him for a relief pitcher who meant nothing to the current White Sox, right? Bergoya is, a high-level international signing from Venezuela. He was a guy that was kind of touted to be, a pretty pedigree prospect when the Phillies had originally signed him internationally. Really young, still 19 in high A. He's been in high A this entire season at 19. Got a really good approach, good contact skills. A different type of player than Antonacci, but kind of that similar makeup of not a ton of impact, but really good contact, really good approach. He barely chases one professional home run in 2 seasons, right? So that's kind of, you got to look at that and say, what does that mean long term? Does he have enough impact to even get to the big league level, right? So that's kind of, it's hard to gauge fully. But generally, he's an athletic guy. He's fast. He's got really good quick hands, contact. But probably long term a second baseman with minimal power. So kind of caps the ceiling a little bit there.
Elite contact rates. To your point about just the bat to ball there, and kind of that similar profile to a degree with Antonacci. The thing I think why I like Antonacci a little bit more is that he's older, so that does work in his favor in terms of maybe being able to just be a little bit more physical at this point, but also does have a little bit bigger of a frame. For Goya, kind of 5'8", maybe 5'9".
Yeah,
but what's amazing is that he's running an in-zone contact rate of about 92%, and then really does a good job of spoiling pitches outside of the zone, out of zone contact rate of 73%. So when your overall contact rate's encroaching on 90%, you're going to be in the top couple percent of minor league baseball, no matter what the level is. And at 19 years old, seems like a guy that can just kind of slap it around the yard and play several positions around the infield and maybe be a solid utility piece.
Yeah, that's exactly what you're looking at for him, which is a solid piece to have in the system, right? Seth Keener is someone that I'm pretty high on. Actually, I really like Keener's stuff. It's an interesting kind of profile because he was never able to really find the zone consistently at Wake Forest, was pitching mostly as a reliever because of that. And then the White Sox drafted him in the 3rd round and immediately had signaled, I talked to Keener right after he was drafted, and he immediately said, we're going to be starting. They want me starting. We're going through the routine. I'm learning this routine of being a starter. The command is still going to take time, right? This is it's impossible to expect a college reliever to immediately transition into a starter and have the command perfect in his first season, right? It's been up and down this year for sure, but the stuff has played well this year. In single A this season, he's got a lot of whiffs. The slider is kind of his bread and butter. It's definitely up and down in terms of his location with it, but when he's able to really locate that slider and get his fastball in the upper part of the zone, especially, this is someone who could develop in the right direction. I think it's just more of you don't want him to immediately go back to being a reliever. But if that's the backup, right, you've got a really good reliever. He did it in college. He was effective. The slider could be, he could throw the slider 40-50% of the time as a reliever and be incredibly effective. So I think you're looking at a solid young arm who is going to take more time to develop than a normal college pitcher, but you're willing to take that risk because you're trying him as a starter. And if it works, it could be pretty good overall. I mean, he got the bump to high A coming off an injury a few weeks ago. And has had a few starts, his last 2 starts of the season, where he looked solid. The command wasn't there yet, but he was coming off of a 2-month gap, not pitching basically. So I think it's more of a long-term project if you're going to keep starting him, but generally someone that is definitely, worth keeping an eye on. That's why he's on this names to watch list.
Yeah, I would say I'm down to see them try it, and we see
Right.
so many. Now it's starting to happen more and more with college relievers that get an opportunity to start professionally, and all of a sudden things click for them. And Christian Scott, great example of that. Of course, coming out of UF, really mostly was working as a reliever, and we're going to talk about another guy in a little bit that was mostly a college reliever that gets an opportunity here to start, and in the short spurts that we've seen has looked really darn good. The nice fallback, though, with a guy like Keener, as you mentioned, the slider, that pitch has been dominant, not only in college, but now professionally as well. That is a plus pitch. So having that as a fallback, and then that in shorter spurts, that fastball, rather than sitting 92, 94, will sit closer to 94, 95. you know he's going to be good in relief. So you have that fallback plan. Might as well see what you got here and see if you can stretch him out as a starter. The changeup flashes, but it's just been far too inconsistent. Same with the fastball command. The slider
Yeah,
he lands consistently too, which is
100%.
funny. It's just that's the pitch that just comes natural to him. But having that fallback as a solid reliever,
Yeah.
he's clearly got a big league role, I think, there for him.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more. Ronnie Hernandez is an interesting one. Probably a name that I don't think is probably one of the less known names on this list in general. This guy is a catcher in Single A. He's been there all season in Kannapolis, and he is really raw still. There's a lot to kind of figure out there. But I do like the swing, and I think he's got some impact to tap into still. Only had one homer this year, but this is a guy who was, really dominant in the Arizona Complex League last year and the Dominican League the year before, and flashed more power originally. 62 walks, 59 strikeouts this season for a 19-year-old catcher is definitely not the most common thing you'll see. He is really patient. He's a good kind of just sound hitter, all things considered. He drives the ball kind of gap to gap. He's good at, moving it where he wants to. I think there's more impact there. That's the big question for him. And then defensively, right, he's definitely still raw behind the plate. He's a big guy. He's a little bit slow behind the plate at this point. But I have heard really good things from the organization and from the coaches down in Kannapolis about his progression this year. I think they've really wanted to give him this entire season at Single A to just work through being a catcher, to work with pitchers, to try and continue to learn, what that means to catch at the pro level. I think he's still a long ways away, but someone that I have my eye on at least, because there's a lot of these college catchers in this system in high A and double A, even up in triple A, right? That are kind of that bridge between Edgar Caro and then a bunch of more depth pieces. He's the one other catcher that I could see, if things go the right direction the next few years, you're looking at him as more of a legit catching prospect. He's not there quite yet, but he's someone that I at least think is intriguing in that position.
No, and he definitely got better at limiting the run game down the stretch. Yeah. Final 9 games behind the dish, cut down 37.5% of base stealers. So that's 24 tries. He gunned down 9 of them. So, I mean, that was coming after, I think base stealers went 5 for 5 in a game against Fayetteville. So clearly settled in there, and that's just one side of it. But as a 19-year-old catcher who's definitely, I think, as you mentioned, the bat's kind of always been ahead of the glove, it's nice to see that development in terms of learning the running game and how he's handling the staff. We got 2 more on the names to watch before we get into the top 15.
Yeah, 2 more guys to fly through. Nick McLean, right? I can't say I have that much on Nick McLean because we haven't seen him play it this year. But, success, the younger brother of Matt McLean, for those who obviously know Matt McLean on the Reds, and Sean McLean is in the system for the Dodgers right now. But, family lineage, right? He was a college bat. He's switch hitter with a pretty good, well-rounded, game, right? He's got some pop. He's flashed really good approach in college. The injuries held him back, right? So he was hurt for, I think, 2 of his 3 seasons. He didn't play much at Arizona State. And then he started at UCLA, moved to Arizona State. Last year, he played it the second half of the season. He went on a streak where he had like a really, really hot run when he got healthy finally for Arizona State and looked like, a legit top 2-3 round guy. The sample was small, but the White Sox still went for it in the 3rd round. I think it was probably a little bit of an aggressive, draft slot for him, but at the same time, like really good field to hit. He's played center field and looks comfortable in center field. I think probably more of a left fielder long-term. I think he could stick in center, but when you look throughout the organization, I think there's other guys that are better defensively in center. But McLean can play all over the outfield. He's got experience. And I think generally this is a guy that you can see and look at and say, like, there's more to tap into there because he just doesn't have that many games under his belt. I think you think he could add some more power potentially. He could find a little more consistency with his swing. I think there's more life there to dream on for a guy that was a 3rd round pick and didn't play that much in college compared to most guys of his draft pedigree.
I like the pick there. I thought it was fun because you're going upside. Obviously, you mentioned the family, the athleticism, and Nick McLean has that as well. But really solid, like sound swing from both sides of the plate, elevates consistently. I mean, he kept the ground ball rate when he was on the field and like below 35%. So it's a guy that I should think could kind of split the gaps both ways. If he can stick in center field, obviously that really helps his profile. But you get a switch hitter who hits the ball in the air consistently and is extremely patient and can run a little bit. Like, I mean, that's a fun profile to grab, in first 2 rounds.
Yeah, and I think because of his age, and he hasn't played this year because he's kind of just getting in game shape because Arizona State they got eliminated early, so he had like a 2-month layoff of barely playing games. He didn't play in a summer ball or anything. He's trying to stay healthy. So I think for him, it's like you could probably send him straight to high A next year, and I think he's someone who would succeed at the level. But next year is just all about getting him, a full season of games and really just letting him develop, and then hopefully he can take off from there, right? The last guy on this list that on the names to watch is Peyton Pallette. this was a late ad for me that I kind of added in there because he is fascinating, right? He was, been a starter throughout his career. He was coming off TJ when the White Sox drafted him out of college. It was a second round pick, an aggressive pick for sure, coming off of still recovering from Tommy John at the time. Last year, his first season back, showed some promise, but still kind of wasn't there with the command. That's normal for TJ guys, right? Starts this season in Winston. Really just couldn't locate. The numbers were pretty ugly as a starter this year. It was a walk rate over 15%. I think it was close to 20% as a starter, which, is just obviously not sustainable. He was getting late in counts. He wasn't going deep in games. It was just he didn't look like he was prepared, or not even prepared. He just wasn't managing the starter workload very well. So the idea from the White Sox was not to fully make him a reliever, but to make him this 2-inning reliever. Before literally 2 days ago, Peyton Pallette went 13 straight 2-inning appearances without allowing a run. In that stretch, he had 39 strikeouts in 26 innings of work. The stuff is off the charts. And when he's now been allowed to just let it rip in these short innings, you're seeing, the numbers, this is before 2 days ago when he gave up a few runs in a game, but, a 0.5 ERA, 0.62 whip, strikeout rate of almost 40% since becoming a reliever. And he's got that walk rate down. So it's not like he's just striking guys out and being effective. He's not throwing, he's attacking the zone because he's got the velo up. He's letting his stuff just fly. And this is a guy who, has moved from being like a fringy starter in this system who wasn't locating well to now like the clear-cut best reliever. And I think he's up in Chicago in 2025 out of the bullpen at this point.
Leaning into that fastball changeup combination, right? Because I think that the breaking ball is just seemed like he just didn't have the consistency there. And it seems like he's more of a pronator. Great. Okay. Lean into that now. And as you mentioned, like in the last 15 outings, this is even including the rough one last time out for him, 74% strike rate on the fastball, 74% strike rate on the changeup. Everything else was around 50%. And he still tried to throw the curveball, like he mixed it in there, but it just hasn't been there for him as much. When it is around the zone, like it's a pretty good pitch. But the fact that he can just go fastball, changeup, and mow hitters down, and I think be a solid reliever there. I think that was a good move by the White Sox to maximize him. Also, just build some confidence. Maybe they want to try him back as a starter again, see what happens. Clearly, the stuff plays, as you mentioned, and kind of seeing him in these 2-inning spurts probably gain some confidence, see how his stuff plays, and then maybe this offseason try to find a better feel to spin it that could get him back into a rotational look. But if not, I like what you mentioned here. Like, not only is he a potential high leverage reliever whose stuff clearly ticked up when he went into those 2-inning spurts where he was sitting 95, 96. There was a couple outings where he was averaging closer to 97 this year. Can fly through the minor leagues now and not only just be that reliever, but you got a multi-inning reliever here too. A guy that could potentially be an opener for you, can be the kind of the Swiss Army knife in the bullpen and potentially move around for you. So it seems like he's got a big league role coming for him, and it's nice to see him settle in as they adjusted the workload. And I wonder if that's something that we'll get to him in a second, but something that maybe they're trying to do with Iriarte at the big league level. So we'll get to Iriarte in a moment, but we'll jump into the top 15 in a second here, which starts with Nick Nastrini. But before that, a quick break. All right, let's start with Nick Nastrini at number 15. I know a guy that you have seen plenty of and have interviewed plenty on Future Sox, but it's never been a question of the stuff. I don't need to tell you that. I don't even think I need to tell anybody that's listening that. When he's on, it's crazy. And I there's been some outings where I actually talked to a couple of the guys on the Jumbo Shrimp, a couple of my buddies there. And there's games where it's like, man, we can't really touch it because he's going to throw the fastball, the slider, the changeup, the curve, and really all of them are pretty darn gross when he's around the zone. But there's also been a lot of outings where guys, just the game plan is, hey, make him throw a strike. And when he falls behind, you can kind of sit on that slider or sit on a fastball and eventually get it. And that's why you see this dichotomy here where there's outings where he's going 6 shutty and punching 10. And then there's outings where he's going an inning and 2/3, like he did against the Orioles the other day, and he's given up 7 runs. The walks seem to be the big issue here. And really, I think that is limited Nastrini from figuring out who he wants to be as a pitcher. Because when you can't locate the changeup, which is a great pitch, and you can't really locate the curveball, which is a great pitch, you kind of become two-dimensional. And even the fastball command hasn't been there for him at points this year. It's really interesting, similar to what we're talking about with Keener, where sliders 69% strike rate this year, and then every other pitch, which is crazy, is a 55% strike rate. So that's just not going to fly if you're going to try to stick as a starter here.
Yeah, no, you hit it on the nail there. I mean, that's exactly right with Nastrini, right? Like when he's at his best, these are 4 average, if not better pitches, right? Like there's times where he flashes all 4 of these as potentially plus offerings, right? Like they're really effective pitches when they're in the zone. But like you said, the slider this year has been there most of the year and everything else really hasn't. And then the issue with that slider is when when he doesn't have the fastball command, right? He's trying to get that slider over for a strike, and then hitters are sitting on it. And if it's not at the bottom of the zone, they're hitting it well. So it's like it is a good pitch, and all of them are good pitches. But when the command, I mean, he's told me this himself, right? Like when the fastball command isn't there, he's just trying to get those breaking balls over. And you can't be forcing your breaking balls in the zone and expect it to work as a starter, especially, right? Like it's different when you're a reliever and you have a spurt where you could just, for an inning, you can chuck sliders and you can hope they're low. You can keep them low in the zone. You can get guys to whiff at you. When you have many innings and guys are seeing you for a second and third time around in a lineup, right? You need that fastball command, and then you need the command of everything, of course, but you got to be able to start it with locating the fastballs on the corners. And for him, it's like when he doesn't have the fastball, he then kind of just relies on floating in sliders and changeups, especially because the curveball only really comes into play when the fastball is there. And the curveball actually at times can be better than his slider. It's a really effective pitch. And I think one of the starts, I saw him in Charlotte a few weeks ago when I was down there, and that start was his best start of the year in Charlotte probably. And the curveball was on point that night, but it was only set up by the fastball and the slider being in the corners of the zone where they weren't getting hit hard, because then he can drop that curveball in and get guys just completely off balance. So for him, it comes down to command, right? Like that's the reality for Nastrini. We've seen him at the big league level have a few really good starts. We've seen him at the big league level have some really brutal starts. And same thing with Charlotte, even in AAA, right? And then, Charlotte's a really hitter-friendly place in AAA, so I try not to put too much stock into pitcher stats in Charlotte because the ball just flies out there. And for him, it's like he's the type of pitcher where he's going to give up some home runs no matter what, just the way he pitches. So I don't put too much, value into his Charlotte numbers, but at the same time, like he is. It's just, I feel like there's like a few things where he could really just click. And, he changed some of his motion. He moved his back foot around a little bit this year. I think I did a funny interview with him in Charlotte, and he was saying how like he noticed some things on Twitter about how his back foot was moving, and he was landing in a different spot with his back foot when he would plant it. And that was kind of causing his command to drift a little bit. And he's adjusted that, and he's been really focused on keeping his back foot in the same spot. So these are progressions, right? But it's still not consistent yet. I think he, is going to get a chance to start still, because he is one of the guys where like if he can figure some of the command out, right? Like if he can get those 3 pitches to a 60% strike rate, even that could be a starter, right? Like he could live in that 60 something range. I mean, think about a guy like, I think White Sox fans like to bring up Dylan Cease. I'm talking about Nastrini. Like, if you don't have to throw strikes all the time, Cease still has a much better strike rate than Nastrini does, but you can be effective with not being the highest command starter. But right now, it's just not enough command as a starter. So I think you're looking at a situation where he's going to go in the offseason as a starter. He's going to open next year. He's going to try and crack the rotation, right? But then if next season it's still not commanding consistently, then you can think about moving him into a bullpen role where, his breaking balls would be dynamic in a relief role.
And he can just really let that slider rip. And at that point, it's a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, you're looking at just even the ways he's gotten burned this year so far, especially at the big league level. It's a lot of 2-0 sliders, and 1-0 sliders that just hitters know, like, okay, this is the pitch he's going to try to go to erase, this hitter's count. And that's just the challenge there is now you're mitigating your best pitch. And you got to establish the heater. And he's got a good one, but he has just not been able to establish it. So I think that's going to be the big thing here, right? Like there can't be that many easy takes. And, I like to look at like what percentage of fastballs you're throwing are non-competitive, because essentially if you're just giving away a ball to start the count, most counts, like you're swaying the probability against you and getting that guy out pretty significantly, pretty consistently. And far too many of his fastballs are just not even competitive. So it's not even a swing decision for the hitter to take. It's just kind of a automatic 1-0 count. So little things like that obviously are pretty important, but yeah, there's a big league role here for Nastrini one way or another, whether he's able to stick as a starter. And I agree with you. Like he should get every opportunity, especially one more offseason, 24 years old, to just try to hone in on the mechanics, see if he can find a way to fill up the zone enough with his other offerings. If not, you still have another relief piece here that could be a pretty darn good one and is capable of going multiple innings. Yeah. Brings us to number 14, acquired at the deadline in that Eric Fetty, Michael Kopech, larger deal. Alexander Albertus. I said that right? It's Albertus?
Yeah, sounds right.
Okay. It's from Aruba, I believe. Third baseman. Finished the year in low A, but was hurt. signed by the Dodgers for $75,000 in 2021. Still, obviously, if you're watching on YouTube, you need to do the write up here. But what's interesting about him is the profile, right? Because I actually think there's a high floor aspect, relatively speaking. He has a pretty good feel to hit. He has a great approach, already extremely selective for a prospect as young as he is, and I think just where he's at in his development. But he's probably a guy that's likely to slide over and predominantly play third base, and that's where I wonder with below average power, what does that profile look like? He's 19, so you can hope that he grows into a bit more, but he's 6'1", like 160, 170. And if you look at the build, I just don't know if there's that much more strength to add there.
Yeah.
But he does grind out ABs well. Last year, again, ran a chase rate below 15%, or this year, I should say, but it's over for him with the injury. There's some things to like, but I just struggle to figure out exactly what the profile will ultimately look like as a guy that plays third base and doesn't have the power. But if he can grow into a little bit more, he could be maybe an outslug the EVs type because he does hit the ball in the air with a fair amount of consistency. But again, it's just kind of this weird tweener aspect. It does help that he can play solid defense at third and maybe move around the infield, play a little second base. But again, I just wonder where the offensive profile settles.
I was going to say, I can tell you the profile could just, be at second base because that's definitely a reality here. I mean, I think there's a chance, right? You've said it, you hit it there. Like he's a good defensive third baseman. He plays a solid third base, but I do think there's a pretty decent chance that he ends up at second base because it's more of that contact oriented. The EVs aren't great. He's not going to slug for a ton. I think his arm is probably, good, not great at third. It's definitely not your ideal. It also depends on kind of, how he rises, right? He's still super young. So it was an interesting second piece. I think it was, we talked about the trade itself being a little bit undervalued, but now, we're seeing Eric Fetty actually not do great in St. Louis. So there's give and take, right? But then you've got Michael Kopech being the best reliever in baseball. So there's, some depth to that trade. It's an interesting deal. I think Albertus is definitely a name to watch. I haven't get to, watch him much because he hasn't played for the White Sox, organization yet. So I'm excited to just actually get to watch him next year when he's fully healthy and see what he's got, because he kind of is going to join that core of, we're going to hit on a few of the guys coming up, but there's this emerging core of some 18, 19-year-old guys, with Ronnie Hernandez being one of them we mentioned earlier, but there's definitely a little core of these young, teenage guys who are in Kannapolis this year and should mostly be in Kannapolis or maybe Winston a little next year, that I think we're excited to see. And it's kind of that hopeful next wave where you have a few guys that could take a step forward. Now Albertus is one of those guys. We just got to get him, some innings.
Yeah, and he's not going to be a fall league guy, right?
No.
Yeah, it's a stress reaction in his left tibia. So, I don't even know what that means, but it doesn't sound like something you want to rush back from. Sounds like it'll probably be fine for the start of next season, especially considering that, he was shut down late July. So plenty of time to get back and plenty of time to just develop, being that he's just 19 years old. So yeah, he's another player I am excited to see, because you never know. Like there's a world where he can, come back and maybe, some of that subdued power was due to the nagging issues maybe that he had with his leg, and he's able to tap into a little bit more. Maybe he adds a little bit more strength as he rehabs that. And all of a sudden we have a guy that's closer to fringy power, and with the field to hit and approach, that would actually make the profile, like even if that power gets to 45 grade, like now it looks like he could maybe hit enough to carve out an everyday role, especially with the versatility, being able to play a little third and second and maybe shortstop in an absolute pinch. So just a guy, I agree. I'm excited to just see what it looks like next year. 13, I know, is one of your favorites, so I will definitely hand it over to you here. But Aldrin Batista, right-handed pitcher, very unique release. And I can't lie, like the mechanics and everything do kind of scream reliever, but sometimes there's just guys that look like that and they make it happen. And I would say like the stuff and the pitchability doesn't scream reliever as much, right? Like there's a guy that has a 26% strikeout rate this year and has walked about 8.5%. So he's been around the zone. He limits damage pretty well. He picks up a decent amount of contact on the ground. Nothing jumps off the page. I do think that like working down on the mound, low 3/4 release does result in some pitches just taking off on him, and another guy that does mix in some probably a few too many non-competitive pitches, but he is able to get back in the zone and mitigate the walks. My concern is falling behind sometimes as often as he does, that could come back to bite you more in Double-A, whereas now like he just can erase those 1-0, 2-0 counts pretty easily with, his nasty slider. And again, just the unique angles that he creates with his fastball and changeup and sinker. But this was a $10,000 international free agent signed by the Dodgers. So this is a guy that's still, I think, kind of budding and just starting to get onto people's radars. But I know he's been on yours for a little bit now.
Yeah, I've been on him all this season, and you're completely right in some of your concerns there with the releases. It's really funky. He's got the old school rock back, and then he releases from that low angle. So it's definitely a really unique. I mean, he's got the release point of 5.4, right, or 5.3 even on the breaking balls, right. So it's definitely a really really unique makeup. But he's a guy who I like the way he attacks the zone. I think he's really confident with his slider in the zone, which is something you don't see from a lot of young pitchers his age. I think in general he can go after hitters in a way that most guys don't. He's got this two seam, he relies primarily on it. It's really a sinker. I mean, it's got a ton of bite to it, 17 inches of horizontal movement on that, on his, his traditional, his fastball, but it registers weird kind of, it registers as two different fastballs, but it really is just a sinker. He doesn't throw the traditional four seam much at all. The sinker slider combo just works for him, and it plays off each other really well. And he goes at people with it, a 65% strike rate with the sinker, 64% with the slider, right? And I think those could even tick up a little more. And you're right about some of the uncompetitive pitches, but weirdly enough, it's gotten even better since he got to high A. So this is someone who, in single A this year, I was looking at him and I was saying, the stuff is there, but he still needs to find a little more consistency. He still needs to find the zone more often. A 3.5 ERA in single A with a 1.25 whip. He had a decent amount of walks, but still pretty, kept in check. 33 walks across 17 starts there in single A. Gets to high A to finish out the year this year, makes his final 5 starts with Winston, gives up a total of 3 runs in his first 5 high A starts, only 6 walks in those 5 starts, right? So the stuff is continuing to progress throughout the year. I think it's something that we, I wanted to see all season, what does this look like at the next level? And I know generally Winston is decently pitcher friendly sometimes, but at the same time, his stuff has gotten better. It is moving the right direction. And like you mentioned, international signing from the Dodgers, the White Sox traded him just for international signing money. So they traded no players, no anything. They just gave the Dodgers a little bit of money. The Dodgers needed to make a signing, right? And they get a guy in Aldrin Batista who's now, a really legit pitching prospect. And I think there is definitely some reliever risk there, but I think he pairs those two pitches well enough with his sinker slider combo where if he can really emerge with that changeup, then you're looking at a legit starter. And the changeup has flashed a lot this year. It hasn't been perfect, but it definitely has started to flash some good things. 19 inches of horizontal movement on the changeup.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Everything moves for him. That's the thing. And that's the calling card. If he can be a guy that can have all 3 of those pitches move a lot and be near the zone consistently, then you're looking at a starter profile because he has the three pitches there consistently. The changeup, a 59% strikeout rate. It's not bad for a changeup, especially at his age. But I think you want to see that tick up a little bit. If he can get all 3 of those pitches in the mid to high 60s of the strike rate, then I think there's starter upside there. And I think there's more upside than a lot of the younger arms in the system for him, even if there is definitely some risk with his motion and his release.
Yeah, and I'd love for him to lean into the ground ball thing a little bit more, where he gets a ton of ground balls with the fastball, but then the rest of his arsenal isn't totally conducive to it as much. The changeup is too, but for the slider, I've seen more recent starts. He was starting to throw it with more horizontal, but at times it could be a little bit more the vertical. And I would like to see a 4-seamer, or at least something that's a little bit more true to a 4-seamer at the top, because he's going to work east-west still really well. And that slider getting, even if it's not getting as much horizontal as you want, it's still going to feel like it, because the fastball, as you mentioned, is going to get 17.5 roughly of horizontal going to the arm side. So anything the other way is really going to kind of feel overwhelming and play up. But even if you could just buzz up a fastball, 10% of the time, it could be dead zone. I still think it would play great from that release. And then, just kind of figuring out all that to say, this is a young pitcher who somewhat burst onto the scene this year, just turned 21. This is a good developmental challenge, I think, for the White Sox to see how can we maximize this unique arsenal. And you can't teach the 17.5 inches of horizontal at 94 miles per hour from that release. You just can't teach that. But what you can teach now, which is great, how do we build off of that? And how do we kind of cater this arsenal to build off of what is a very unique sinker that really, I think you just can't, that part's you can't teach. So how do we build off of that with a strong baseline? I think with the right pitch selection and the right arsenal and the right sequencing, he can definitely stick as a starter. But I also love the idea of, if it doesn't work from that release, that run that he's getting on the fastball and then a slider going the opposite direction and him probably playing up velocity wise in shorter spurts, he could be nasty as a multi-inning reliever. And that's a trend here through these White Sox arms. It's like, at the very least, a lot of them do have that reliever fallback more than I think a lot of other pitching prospects. Like aside from like Drew Thorpe, where it's never going to be a reliever fallback for the most part. Like they mostly have guys that are I think built for high leverage if it doesn't work out as a starter, which can be frustrating because that means usually it's command challenges. But I mean, if you're the White Sox, you just need big league arms, period.
Yes.
So
there's a lot of guys, and there's a lot of, I mean, there is a lot that should be big league arms, right? And I think Batista is an example of one that does have that upside. So it's exciting at least. And even if there is that fallback of a reliever.
Absolutely. And now we go to a bat here, which is fun because I feel like we're going to get a few more bats moving in here, but still also just plenty of arms throughout this system. I don't need to tell you that. 12, Geraldo Perez, who was, I would say, probably the headliner in the package that the aforementioned package with Albertus that came over from the Dodgers in that 3-team trade. But Perez, second baseman, really got off to a phenomenal start to the season. And that helped him earn an opportunity at the Futures game where I got to see him play there. I mean, this is an outslug the EVs type of guy. It's pretty solid athlete that can play second, can play third, has even filled in, playing short a few times a week. Signed for $400,000 with the Dodgers a few years ago. I got to update the year there. That's not right. But he's a dude that really does get into it consistently to the pull side. I'm interested to see if he can do that at the more challenging levels. But it is always encouraging when you have a smaller framed guy that, is probably not going to grow into that much more physical imposition, that they can really already backspin and elevate as consistently as someone like Perez can. And also a big component to the outslug the EVs type is being able to have a strong plate discipline. And Perez has just that as well. So he fits the bill for the most part of a guy that can be that pull side, Isaac Paredes light type of archetype, but he's going to have to lean into that. Obviously, it's a very specific profile, and a lot of things have to go right.
Yeah.
But I think you're seeing the start here, where at 19 years old, the EVs are above average for his age. The ability to get the ball in the air is well above average for his age. The plate discipline's above average for his age, and he's a solid defender at multiple infield spots.
Yeah, you hit it there with everything, and the pull side power, right? Like it's not just some power like you mentioned. It is that Paredes type thing where it's, he's able to pull the ball, and he's never going to be a guy that has a ton of natural pop. But we've seen the slug numbers be pretty good. I mean, 25 doubles, 12 home runs this season in his first full professional season, right? As a guy who doesn't have a ton of power. I mean, he's listed at 6 foot. He's not 6 foot. He's definitely a smaller dude in stature, but at the same time, like he is able to get that ball. He turns on it. He pulls it well, and I think you're right. The approach is good. I think you'd like to see some of the speed numbers tick up. I think he looks pretty fast to me when he's running, but he doesn't really steal much. I'm curious to see if that'll be kind of an added impact to his game, because I think if this is a guy who can do some of that stuff you were talking about offensively, but also steal, 15 bags maybe, especially the way he walks, right? That would be another added layer that can kind of make him more appealing as a versatile infielder. It's a second base profile to me, probably. I think he has played a lot of shortstop this year, was playing mostly second within the Dodgers org. I think he's, in Indianapolis, they've been trying to get him some decent reps at shortstop. He looks more comfortable to me at second. I think the arm's better at second. I'm not sure the arm is quite there for shortstop. So I think it's probably, a powerful second base profile, but it is a fun bat. And I think he's someone who has a little bit of a capped ceiling because of some of the things that you were hitting on, but is also someone who should rise at a decent level and can be, at the very least, a big league utility piece. I think the goal, you're dreaming on a starting second baseman with 15 homers and a good on base percentage, right? Like that's, I think, the ideal outcome for him. But I also can see a world where he is a pretty productive utility piece who gets on base frequently and can hit some homers off the bench, stuff like that.
Yeah, if he could hit 15, I think even potentially 20, depending on how he fully grows into it and walks and makes enough contact and plays good defense, like that's a regular at second base. So you can still dream on that there. And I think next year will be fun to just see how, after the hot start, plateaued in the middle, finished pretty strong this year, though. I think I had some nice games down the stretch, several multi-hit games as he finished up. Like it'll be fun to see how he handles maybe high A next year and in that age 20 season, see how he builds off of what was an impressive year overall for him at 19 years old, and enough to play his way into being a key piece in a pretty solid trade package there. So it'll be fun to see how he builds off of this season. Guy that is building quick and looks like a dude all of a sudden out of the bullpen, but maybe could have a different role. We'll see. We'll see exactly how the White Sox want to go about it. Sean Burke, this was a late riser in our rankings here because Burke, I mean, it's been a matter of one, getting healthy, and two, the command. And usually those go hand in hand, especially if it's a shoulder issue. And that's what Burke was dealing with, if I'm not mistaken. This guy's pedigree, ran, right? Like, he's a former third-round pick. He's had stretches in the minors where he's looked really, really good. Even though it feels like he's been around forever, he's not even 25 yet, still 24 years old for the remainder of the season. When it comes to in-zone whiff rates, they're really strong. And when you see like what he's able to do, his big league, like first big league start, or excuse me, first big league appearance, he went 3 innings. Like, it wasn't just like a 1-2 inning, spurt. It was 3 innings of quality ball against the Guardians. But, even if you look at what he was doing in AAA, the run prevention side, as you mentioned, you always got to take with a grain of salt in Charlotte. But what you look at from what he was able to do from a swing and miss perspective, the stuff was definitely stuffing. He's 6'6", 2. So it gets on you. He gets good extension. Fastball sits 95, at least 94. And that slider is disgusting. It's common theme through this White Sox system. Okay, what's the feel going to be for the curveball and the changeup, the third and fourth pitches here? But there's no doubting the quality of those pitches when he does have it around the zone. But at the very least, he's shown that he can throw the fastball and slider for a strike. That's why I feel very confident that this is a big role now. Like, this is a guy that can pitch the 7th and 8th for you now. But I think there's room for more, and I know you agree.
Yeah. Speaking of the role, I do know for a fact that Sean Burke is expected to make a start this weekend, which is exciting. I heard about that yesterday. So that's going to be great to see kind of what he does in a starting role, because, he's been starting in Charlotte, right, all season as he works his way back. This is a guy who, like, you hit on this a little bit, but he was expected to debut last year, right? Like, he was kind of that, first guy up from Charlotte last year. And then he had the shoulder issue that was lingering, and then he eventually got shut down and had surgery on it, right? So this is a delayed debut that should have happened last year if he wasn't hurt. And then this year it was like he was working back, he was finding his rhythm. It took him some time coming off of surgery. And then the last month or two was like, okay, this guy's, looks like he's ready. And I've been kind of harping on him being called up for 2-3 weeks now, because I see what he was doing in Charlotte, and I saw the progression he was making. And I was like, okay, we need to see this at the big league level, because you're going into 2025 with a guy who, some people still profile more as a reliever. And I've kind of said that as well, that he could be that really good, piggyback guy, long relief type, profile. But at the same time, he could be a starter, and he could be someone who takes claim to a starter spot, because that fastball and slider is so good. And because the curveball, when he locates it, is an incredibly good pitch. So the thing with the curveball is, like, it's not often a strike, but when it is a strike, or not even when it's a strike, but when it's right at the lower part of below the zone, even, it's really effective. He gets a lot of swing and miss on that curveball. He just, he's got to get it up from 55% strike rate. The slider has become more utilized for him because he's more comfortable throwing it for a strike. But the curveball, when it's on, it is a plus pitch at times. So I think for him, it's just, if he can get that pitch in closer to the zone more often, then it's a really competitive, double breaking ball combo there with his fastball that has continued to tick up. And his fastball, he hit 98.8 this week in his debut, after topping at 97.3 this season in AAA. So it's like, he's got more in the tank, especially if he would become a reliever. He's someone who I think could sit, 97 if he's relieving. Even if he's starting, though, if he's sitting 95, 96, or even, that's a pretty good fastball, especially with, 18 and 2.2 inches of vertical, right? Like, there's a reason to believe he could have 3+ pitches in the future if all 3 of those continue to trend the right way.
Yeah, adrenaline's a hell of a drug. It shows you what these guys actually could have in the tank there. But I love that you mentioned the curveball too, because when I look at players like this, okay, fastball, slider, you got righties. That's going to work for righties, and you can just sprinkle in one of the other 2 pitches, to just to take them off the trend there, or the rhythm. But when a guy is kind of struggling with the command of 2 other pitches to try to find that third offering, it's always nice that it's a curveball or a changeup from a righty, that, like, he only needs one of those to be on in a given night to be able to spell lefties, right? Like, the curveball with the downward action will play well against lefties, but he also has a changeup, which is even more inconsistent, but it just is another iron in the fire that, okay, the curveball's not there, let me try the changeup today. So if he could just find either of those to get to the point where they're fringy, and then at that point just ride the hot hand game to game, like, that could be enough to spell lefties. So I agree with you. I think Burke should get every opportunity to start.
I completely agree. If for those who haven't seen it, go look up his first career strikeout on a curveball against a lefty. It was disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, that thing has some bite to it, and that downward action will play against lefties and, of course, righties as well. Into the top 10, another one of your favorites, I know, a guy that you were on before this year, and I think is really met or maybe even exceeded your lofty expectations with what he's been able to do this year. Mason Adams, Adams older, I think, than some of the other prospects. I mean, maybe not older than Burke and some of the others, but in terms of like age to level and his progression, like he's just now getting to AAA, and he's 24 years old. He'll be 25 at the start of the season. But what he's been able to do as a 13th round pick in 2022, like it's always been pitchability and kind of coming at you with the kitchen sink. But now he's really been able to balance that with getting enough swing and miss and just continuing to fill up the zone. 24% strikeout rate, a walk rate below 6%, and balances that with a ton of ground balls. This just seems like a high probability 4 or 5 starter for a long time that can just consume innings, which the White Sox, again, just need guys like that. And he's a breath of fresh air in a system that has so many volatile arms. To just have a guy that, okay, the ceiling and floor might be so thin that Mason Adams barely fits between them, but I honestly need that. It is nice to have that in the system.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I don't want to put the Drew Thorpe expectation on him, right? But it's more Drew Thorpe than it is these other guys we're talking about in terms of style, in terms of way he pitches, right? Like it's pitchability. He has 4 pitches that he throws for a strike. He throws them consistently. He mixes and matches. He's not afraid to throw his breaking balls early in counts, right? He's just a fun arm. He's the guy you want to root for, and that's why I've kind of clawed onto him last year because he was a piggyback reliever last year to start his career. He was kind of viewed as like, oh, he's got a nice curveball. Maybe he'll develop some other stuff. Like he throws strikes decently often. Like that was kind of his profile. And then 13th round pick, right? Like there wasn't a lot of expectation that he was going to be much. And now you're looking at a guy who, like you said, is a really high floor pitcher. And I think he's going to be a big league starter. I think it's not, you're not looking at a 2-starter, right? Even the best outcome for him is probably not a 2-starter, but it's someone who can be in the back of a rotation and throw consistent strikes and just attack the zone. And that's something that makes him so fun to watch because he really just goes after guys and he sequences really well. And he's got a repeatable motion and it's just simple and it's clean, right? And that's something that you need in a system, with a lot of these volatile arms like you just hit on. So I think you really nailed it there with Adams. I think he's the definition of a guy who is just a development and has grown a lot. And I think is as a testament to what kind of the pitching system looks like right now of someone who you didn't expect to be much and is now a top 10 prospect in the system and is going to be in the big leagues next year. I mean, if he had a back injury right when he got to AAA about a month ago, if he didn't have that injury, he might have debuted with Sean Burke, this last month of the season. And even if he's not, which he's not going to because of the back injury and he had a rough start in his return from it, but he's going to be up next year. There's a chance he cracks the opening day rotation. And if not, he'll be up pretty early next season because he's shown just about all you need to show at the minor league level, that he can attack the zone. He can be effective. The curveball is also plus. Like that's the other thing with him is that like he does have good pitches. It's not just command, right? Like his curveball is a true plus offering. His slider is flash plus. Like there's a lot to like there with both the breaking balls and the fastball is pretty effective when it has run on it and he's able to, pound the zone with it consistently.
It's pretty impressive how hard he throws a curveball considering the fastball is mostly going to be low 90s, right? It averages about 91 91 and a half, and it'll get a little bit higher than that. But, curveballs perform so much better the harder you get if you're able to maintain the depth. And he throws that curveball at 82 miles per hour. Usually a guy that's going to be sitting in the low 90s is going to have a curveball that's more in the upper 70s. So I think that it creates a difficult perspective for hitters. And that's why you combine the curveball and slider. Opponents are hitting just $188 against those 2 pitches this year. And the fact that he can also mix in, 2 different fastball shapes and a changeup in there, like he can just come at you a lot of different ways and get enough whiff and then balance the swing and miss as well. Getting to number 9, I'd love to be able to dive deeper into Caleb Bonham. But of course, we haven't been able to see much. I've had limited video from like the Bridge League. And I know for you, it's been more of just like, who can I reach out to within the White Sox organization and just kind of get some word. Bonham, he got first round money. I think he was a bit of a mixed bag in terms of where he was going to land in the draft. We saw earlier in the draft cycle, kind of slam dunk first round pick because he was back-to-back Gatorade Player of the Year for the state of Michigan. But then on the other side, you had some inconsistent summer circuit performances, which I think made some people think, oh, maybe he's more of a second round pick. Also, pretty strong commitment to UVA. $3 million can make any strong commitment change very quickly. And it would for me, I can promise you that. I think Bonham is just one of those players where it's a wait and see thing. But I do know from what you've told me, that the White Sox, even the early going from just these scrimmage games and the Bridge League and whatever the heck they're doing on the backfields right now that we don't totally know about and isn't tracked.
Yeah.
They've been impressed with what Bonnemer's been able to do so far.
Yeah, so we knew when I was tracking the draft, right? Like we were seeing the draft strategy later in the drafts be a lot of money saving picks. So I knew Bonnemer was going to get above slot. It became pretty obvious after the first, after day 2, especially, that he was going to get significantly above slot money in the second round, just based on how the rest of the draft went. And it is an indication of what the organization thinks about him. And everybody I talked to a variety of floating staff guys and development guys when I was in Charlotte, when I was in Kannapolis recently, and like, they rave about him. So I'm not going to act like I know a ton about him because I haven't seen that much, like you just hit on. But what I do know is the organization really likes him. He's hitting really well in Bridge League games. And he's someone that I think is, very projectable in terms of upside power. He showed it in high school. They think he plays a legit shortstop, right? I think it's similar to that. Some people have pegged him similarly to Colson, but I think it looks like he's going to be a legit shortstop, and I think that's what the organization views him as. So I think, a lot of projection, there's a lot of unknowns, but, it's someone that is, the talent is there and the pedigree is there for us to have him in the top 10.
Absolutely. And I mean, the fact that they're pretty encouraged with the defense on the left side, I think even if he doesn't stick it short, the fact that, hey, we think he has a chance to stick it short, that if he slides over to third, it could be very, very solid there. And in terms of the offensive upside, that there's enough there if it all comes together to handle that move to third, right? Where it's above average power and potential for average hit. It's a little stiff in the box. And so I just would love to see more reps and just get more live looks and just video looks just to see how that operation works. Because in the limited video I've been able to see, it does look a little bit rigid at times, but there's certain hitters that can just make that work. And he might just be one of them. So I just have to see more, but there is a little bit of concern about some stiffness in the box. But overall, it seems like he's got a pretty good feel for the barrel, and I don't think there's any doubting the power potential there as well.
Yeah.
We'll get into another player of yours that I think you're very pumped on, and number 8. And this is, in terms of range of outcomes, nobody in the system I think has a wider range of outcomes. George Wolkow. And I always want to say Wolkow, but it's Wolkow.
Yeah, it is Wolkow. I always want to say Wolkow too, but it is Wolkow.
I don't know why. Wolkow. Yeah. I always want to say Wolkow. I mean, there's got to be. I think he's got to be one of the most replied under like names on tweets of mine all the time. Like, when are you going to talk about Wolkow? When are you going to talk about? Like, when we do the White Sox system, the dichotomy of like how low the contact rates are, but how he's also been able to survive and actually post decent numbers as an 18-year-old in low A is very impressive considering he's 6'7".
Right.
I'll let you kind of break it down and then I'll fill in the gaps here. But the one thing I do want to just note is 109 mile per hour, 90th percentile exit velocity from an 18-year-old is like unfathomable. You just don't see it. A 40% strikeout rate for a guy in a top 10 prospect list in any system is also pretty rare. That's what you get here when you have an outlier prospect. So it's like if you run 100 simulations here, there's some simulations where there's going to be some results where Wolkow doesn't even perform above high A. But then there's also going to be simulations and results where he's hitting 40 in the show. And so you have to average those in the middle, and which is, again, very wide gaps here, but there's just enough upside there where I just don't think a guy can, with his capabilities, can be outside of the top 10. If he didn't have a position, I probably would have pushed him out. But the fact that he moves as well as he does, and the fact that he can play a good corner, like that really does lean into the Joey Gallo comp. So I'll let you just kind of run here, because I know it's a guy that you've enjoyed covering plenty and are excited about, potentially, what he can do.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've started writing a piece when I was in Candy about him for JB, and I'm going to finish it up at some point just about who he is as a prospect. So I'm definitely going to do a full write-up on him just in depth about who he is as a player and a person, because he's an interesting guy. I mean, he skipped his 4th year of high school. He finished high school in 3 years to go to the draft at 17 years old, and that's not normal, right? He was going to be a first rounder potentially this year and skipped his last year of high school to go last year, gets 3rd round money in the 7th round from the White Sox, right? Like, you hit it there. I mean, this is a guy who can legit hit 40 homers and also a guy who might not make it to the bigs ever. So there is super wide range of outcomes, but he has gotten much better in the field. That's one thing you mentioned. Like, he's a legit right fielder. This is someone who I think his arm is obviously going to play up. He's got a ton of arm strength and natural strength, but he also is getting better just with reads in the outfield. He's not there yet, but he's 18, right? Like, he's got plenty of time in that regard where he's going to be a legit outfielder, in addition to being someone who has ticked up in his plate discipline too. Like, he is walking a good amount now, which is good to see, because early in the season he wasn't walking. He's still striking out a ton, but he's being more patient, a little bit more selective with the breaking balls. He gets thrown a ton of junk. I mean, he doesn't get, people are almost, I mean, pitchers in low A are afraid to throw him fastballs because what he does to them is insane. I think he has just ridiculous numbers against fastballs. Has hard hit rates like over 60%. It's just, I mean, he mashes. But there's a wide range here for sure. I mean, I think we could dive into this guy for a long time because it is such an interesting profile, but I think he's exciting, and I want to keep him this high because the upside is so high. But I mean, the upside is the best hitter in the system, right? Like, there's some really good hitters we're going to touch on soon, and he could be better than all of them by a mile if everything clicks. But there's a lot of ifs there too. You're muted. Aram, you got the mute going, my boy.
Sorry. 370 against heaters, 160 against everything else. So, I mean,
it's going to take some time.
Pulverizes heaters, but you can carve out a nice career here. Just crushing heaters and hangers and not chasing. So that's why I think a big part of this development for Wolko is cutting down the chase and being, you got to be actually elite plate discipline wise, because you know that the hit tool is probably going to be below average even at its best. But if you can cut down the chase, stay on breaking balls enough to crush hangers, crush heaters, there's a big league role there, because he's going to be able to hit a ton of home runs and then play that solid defense. So the plate discipline's a huge wrinkle in this thing, and then just being able to stay on breaking balls at least that are hangers and spin on ones that aren't strikes. It's hard, but especially when you're 6'7", but there's just so much to dream on there, and you can just be a mistake hitter and carve out a career when you've got that kind of power. His 90th percentile of 109, by the way, is the highest in the entire organization, including the big leagues. So
that's insane.
That puts some things in perspective there. An 18-year-old is hitting the ball harder than anybody in the big leagues. So that shows how special he could be power-wise. Number 7 is a very interesting case. Jairo Iriarte. He was so nasty last year. And then this year, it's been solid. Like, he's been able to get guys out and I think keep batting averages in check, and he's been effectively wild. But it's been interesting where his release has changed. It's a little bit more horizontal now. And as a result, the fastball has lost about 3 inches of vert. It's playing more like this kind of two-seamer and flirting with the dead zone. His slider has gone from a more horizontal traditional slider to a slurvier pitch, and it's just not performing quite as well, but it is getting more ground balls. So not as much whiff, but it is still getting ground balls, which hedges. The changeup's actually played up now because of his release point being more horizontal. He's actually getting more horizontal run or fade on that changeup. But it's just been weird to see that fastball, which ticked up about 3 ticks last year, tick back down 2 ticks this year, and have his release point change, which has clearly affected the quality of his stuff. He's still been effective enough and has been able to keep runs off the board. But when you're a guy with fringy command, you want to see that stuff that we saw last year, which was, I mean, that fastball with the 7 feet of extension that he gets from that release and getting the vert, that ride he was getting at the top, it was playing like a 70. And now it's playing more like a 55 because it's 2 miles per hour slower. And it's not getting the ride that it was before. The slider, kind of the same story. It was dominating before, but now his release has been so inconsistent this year that the movement has just been super inconsistent. But then the changeup has come along, which is at least the one positive side of things. Of course, a part of that Dylan Cease return, still extremely talented, but I do kind of wonder where this all settles in now. And as he got called up to the big leagues, they've been using him as a reliever, which is interesting.
Yeah, you hit it with your Iriarte. I think you've dived into this a lot, and I think you did a great job in your write-up talking about kind of the difference. His stuff has ticked down a little. He's still been effective though, so it's like you still like a lot of the things you're seeing from him, and I still think you can envision a plus fastball slider combo with a changeup that has definitely gotten better too, and it actually looks really good at times. So it's like there's possibility here for a 3-pitch mix of a guy that's really good with all 3 pitches and can be a starter, but there definitely is some reliever risk there. And there's some things he still needs to clean up with the command in addition to just kind of maximizing his stuff. And I think for him, I think he just really needs this offseason. I get the idea of trying to get him in the big leagues and test it out a little bit and see these inning spurts, as a reliever. They probably didn't want him throwing too many innings anyways, but I want to see him kind of just have this full offseason and go into next year back in the minors with, getting starts under his belt again and working on that command more.
100%, and just finding more consistency with the release, because what we saw last year was a guy that I thought had some of the best stuff in the minor leagues. I mean, it looked like a fastball that was playing like a 70 and a slider that was playing like a 70, and just to have that pitch totally shift to a slurvier shape, and then have the fastball lose 3 inches of vert and really just kind of start blending horizontally. It just is a totally different outlook, like a totally different arsenal. So just being able to hone back in there, he is still just 22. The upside is still immense. He's just been a very difficult player to figure out, because it's like, is he the 22 or 2022 version, the 2023 version, or the 2024 version? I think the 2024 version somewhere between 2022 and 2023, but the 2023 version is the guy that I think the White Sox were excited to acquire as one of the key pieces in a Dylan Cease return. So still a big league role, even if he's the 2024 version, but the 2023 version looks like a middle rotation arm, and hopefully he can get closer to that again at just 22 years old. This is a big offseason. I agree with you. Number 6, Brian Ramos. He is coming together here. Like, it's starting to get going for him, and he's put some great swings on balls at the big league level now that he got back up. Pretty interesting where he starts the year in Double-A, struggles, gets thrown into the fold in the big leagues, and then struggles there. They send him back down to Charlotte, and then he really gets going and has had a really, really good stretch, and then gets back up to the big leagues, where I actually think he was ready now and looks good. I like Ramos a little bit more than Iriarte just because of what he's doing of late, and also I'm always going to lean slightly towards a position player if they have, if 2 things are kind of equal in terms of future value and what we're looking at here. But Ramos, the plate discipline is really impressive, and I think that's been a calling card for him. I think the speed has continued to be underrated, and now you're seeing it with the Savant availability. Like, he can run. He doesn't steal bags, but he can run. He's come so far as a defender at third, can go play a little bit of second base. They stuck him in left for a game in Charlotte. I don't know why they did that, but interesting to see if they tried.
There was a quote from the organization yesterday about him taking reps in the outfield, and they're not going to play him there in the big league level yet, but I don't like that. I think he's a third baseman personally, but
is interesting. That is very interesting. 4-seam fastballs chewed him up previously, and he's really improved in that regard. And I think laying off of stuff at the top of the zone has also helped him, but also just how efficient his swing has helped him. The bat speed's fringy, but he hedges that with a really compact and direct swing and really good swing decisions. I just see a guy that can hit 20 home runs, hit plenty of doubles, play a good third base, play a good second base, and walk enough, and that would be an everyday player without a doubt. So I think that's what you can dream on here with Ramos, who's sneaky, is also still just 22 years old.
Yeah. No, I like Ramos a lot. I think he's been a guy both of us have always liked. It just, there's been some adjustments he needed to make, and he's made a lot this year. I think he's been more patient. He's been able to hit the fastballs better. And I think, he's carving out a big league role for himself. And I'm curious to see, he should go into 2025 as the third baseman for this team and see what he can do to develop there. I think they still want to play Miguel Vargas there a lot. I think Ramos is just a better defender there. I think I'd rather just see them try and push Vargas to second base and see if he can survive there, because I do think Ramos is a good third baseman. He's not, he survives there, and he's proving to be, a big league quality hitter.
What I love is even if the hit tool stalls out a little bit, he has just the ability to be a lefty masher. He stays on changeup so well. He lives in the zone for a long time and has just historically pulverized left-handed pitching. So that could be the role at the very least, is he's a short end platoon guy that can keep himself in the lineup with some versatility there. And that is the nice little fallback as well.
100%.
Getting into the top 5. A guy that I am so excited to see in the Arizona Fall League. And he's going there, right? Grant Taylor.
He's confirmed
in the Arizona Fall League. My goodness, this stuff is crazy. In terms of stuff, he's a top 100 prospect without a doubt. But the track record is limited, and we've dealt with some injuries here. When it's all right, I mean, we're talking about a fastball that could play like a 70, a slider that could play like a plus pitch, a curveball that could play like a plus pitch, and a cutter that he'll mix in. Second round pick, 51st overall in 2023, despite the fact that, he had to undergo Tommy John surgery and, had to finish his rehab with the White Sox. Comes back, makes his pro debut this year, looked as good as anybody in professional baseball in 4 inning spurts. Only has 4 outings though before a lat issue shut him down for the remainder of this regular season. But Taylor, it was iffy as a freshman at LSU, and then he went on the Cape and just something clicked command wise where he dominated. And that same thing that clicked command wise seemed to spill over even post Tommy John as he threw a ton of strikes and limited action professionally. It really just is a question of the health, because I mean, when you see the ride that he's getting 19 inches of vert on 95 to 97 mile per hour fastballs with plus extension, and then the breaking balls off of that, it's outrageous stuff. It almost feels like without the changeup, it feels like almost a Cade Cavalli for better and for worse type of situation here, where the stuff is so crazy, but it's just becomes, can the command be consistent as he gets stretched out and comes back from another injury, and can he just stay healthy? And those are two big questions, and pretty much the only reason why he's not a top 100 guy.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, his stuff is off the charts. And for a guy coming off of TJ to have the stuff he has and also command it as well as he did, it's pretty hard to find, I think. I mean, you don't see command like that for guys coming off of Tommy John, and especially, these days a little more than it used to be, right? But he still is just pounds the zone. The stuff is electric. The cutter was really impressive to me because I think the fastball is obviously a plus pitch and is going to be, but I think he's kind of worked on honing in that cutter, and it looked really, really nice in a few of the games that I saw from him this season. So this is the guy that, if me and you get out to the Arizona Fall League, we're definitely watching a Grant Taylor start. I'll say that because he is pretty disgusting, and someone who I think, has the upside of that matches, the top 2 arms we're going to talk about soon in this system.
I think in terms of stuff, it's up there with those 2 guys. And sure. I mean, that's the craziest part. So if he can just be stretched out, another guy that where like the fallback is legit elite high leverage, elite high leverage. He could be one of the better high leverage arms in Major League Baseball as a fallback. But
I do think he's a starter too.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. It would be more of a health. It would be like a Mason Miller type of situation.
Exactly.
Where it's like, let's just get every drop out of this. But I think he's got more than enough time to prove that he can stay healthy. At the end of the day, it really is just Tommy John and then maybe residual effects from the Tommy John. That's what you can hope with just the lat thing, and hope that, we haven't had like shoulder things or anything like that we've seen. So, I don't want to fully hit him with that label yet of like, we'll see if he can stay healthy until maybe after the fall. We can see if he builds up some innings, but we just haven't seen him stretched out either. So I just want to see what that looks like as he 5-6 innings. He's only done that a couple times in his career period. I think we're both on the Cape. So it puts things in perspective as well. Number 4, Colson Montgomery. What a unique player to try to figure out. And I don't blame him as much as I blame the White Sox. The fact that this guy is 6'4" high school shortstop. The fact that he has played almost as many games in the upper levels than the lower levels is outrageous to me. And the fact that he's in AAA and now he's going to repeat AAA after a full season potentially, and then almost by default may have to just get rushed to the big leagues and then finish his development out there. I think it's just kind of a reminder that they, I think, fumbled a little bit on the way that they could have handled Colson Montgomery, because I've seen his swing mechanics regress. He was more athletic and free in the box when he was at the lower levels, and looks more advanced than his competition, which is why they probably pushed him. But now in the name of survival, as a 6'4" hitter, he's become a lot stiffer and tried to simplify things in the box, starting more like pre-stacked, and it just looks uncomfortable. He's leaving his base. When you try to simplify things to that degree to survive, you can end up, I think, almost stagnating yourself and getting away from who you are as a hitter. And this is a guy that I think really benefited from fluidity and athleticism and good feel for the barrel, paired with the exciting power. Now it's, selling out for the pull side, pretty stiff and just trying to get the barrel out there. And I think it's almost made him less consistent in the box. He's still just 22, and again, it shouldn't have really been thrusted into AAA the way that he was. So it's hard to assess this season. But when you're playing in a hitter-friendly Charlotte, as we've talked about, and your OPS is 716, it is a little concerning. But he has plus power potential. He has more than enough bat to ball to get into that, and good plate discipline. Even if he has to slide over to third, there's more than enough offensive upside there. He's just so difficult to assess because he's just continuously been pushed to levels that he probably shouldn't have been at yet.
Yeah. And I think that's you hit it there for sure. I think to note like him and where his mindset's at too. Like he's talked about like how like this is the first time he's ever struggled, right? Like that's the reality. Like he's never had this challenge in his career, and now this year has been a struggle for him, right? And he's getting pitched differently than he's ever been pitched, and he's having to face guys who are big league type arms that are getting you out as opposed to just throwing their stuff, right? So it's like there's this big adjustment for him, and he should have started the year in Double A. I thought that at the beginning of the year when he got sent straight to Charlotte, right? So it was a little bit of a push there. But I do think, there's still a lot in the tank there. I think he's been kind of power over hit this year, which wasn't him in the past. And now it's about trying to regather himself as a guy who can get on base consistently, because his approach has always been kind of part of his calling card. So I think there's some things he needs to kind of get back to. And I think the offseason is going to do wonders for him. And I still look at him as a guy who will get up next year, whether that's for better or for worse. But even if he does get up next year, I still think can be an everyday big leaguer. It just is not quite the same looking profile as it looked a year or two ago, right?
Yeah, I just think a mechanical adjustment can unlock so much because the capabilities there, and you'll see like starting a little bit more stacked on his backside, he kind of collapses before he even gets the barrel going, and collapsing that backside and kind of losing his posture and bending over. It's so hard to then turn the barrel around on four seamers. That's why four seamers have blown him up this year. He's hitting 160 against four seamers, and I really do think that's because of the way that his posture has kind of collapsed before he launches the barrel, and how he will kind of lose the barrel behind him with the way that his body's kind of taken him out of it. And I think that was as a result of trying to start a little bit more pre-stacked on the backside and trying to be simple to the ball, but in turn ended up kind of losing that posture and losing some of the verticality there that I think results in the barrel dragging and slipping behind him. And what's funny is when we get to number 3, Edgar Caro had a similar problem where he was starting wider, starting stacked on the backside. And then what he was able to do was make an adjustment to get more athletic in the box again. I put out a whole thread on that, and it was a fun dive to the swing mechanics. We talked a lot about it on the show here, but what's been fun there is that I got to update the field grade there too. It's better than that. He is somebody that I think showed that he can make those mechanical adjustments and get back to being that athletic hitter, because I think he tried to simplify things too. He's very handsy. Edgar Caro is like he's very much a good feel to hit guy and a good approach guy, but now being able to make these adjustments in the box, I think what's fun with Caro is that he was able to start more upright, get into this coil and a simple move instead of starting there and trying to stay there, and it's causing him to get stiff and push out of it. He's clearly found it, and I think the results were there. Where we saw a stark of a difference in production is I think we've seen from anybody in this system with the shift that he was able to make going into this year. Exit velocities jumped 2 miles per hour. I think we saw his pull in the air jump by 8 miles per hour. His hard hit rate jumped by 11 miles per hour. So all of a sudden, Edgar Caro, who has had the hit and approach there for him forever, now has the power ticking closer to 20 home runs. If he's able to do that, even if it's 15, now you have to really like the offensive profile because it looks really well-rounded. The defense has come along to where I think it could be big league average. That's why I got to update that in the tools there. But you have that coming along as well. If he can hit 20 homers and he's going to walk, he's going to put bat on ball and be difficult to strike out from both sides of the plate. And he's done a great job, I think, limiting the running game as a pro, 25% caught stealing rate. Like there's a lot to like with Caro. I think he's a high probability big league catcher regardless. But now with the power ticking up, he looks like he can be an above average big league catcher.
I think he's the franchise catcher. I think it's gotten to that point, right, where we already kind of hoped for that to be the case, right? And then this year, like you said, the adjustments, for those listening, the thread Aram put out of Caro's swing adjustments was like amazing. Aram does a great job with that. So you can definitely check that out because that's the way you can see it really clearly, right? It's a totally different setup. He's getting into his backside so much more than he ever was. The power ticks up, the exit velo ticks up. He's able to elevate more often, right? So it's like, this is a guy who is going to get on base. He's going to walk, right? But at the same time, it is also going to be, hit for some power. I think he's 15, 20 homers in the big leagues now. It is the hope, the way he's been hitting this year. And it's from both sides too. Like he really mashes from the right side, but he also is able to get into it more from the left side too of the plate. So, right, you've got a switch hitting catcher who can be competent defensively and a solid big catcher. I've also heard rave reviews from all the pitchers about the way he game.
That's what I was going to ask you.
The defense is still coming along, but every single pitcher I've talked to in Birmingham and Charlotte in the past 2 years talks about how good he is to work with, how he's always game planning, how he's got him kind of a mental thing going on where he's thinking through the game plans, he's calling pitches,
He's 21 too.
And he's 21, right? He's 21, and he didn't even speak English 3 years ago too. This is a guy who has forced himself. He told me this himself last year. He was like, I practiced English so much because I knew I was going to be having all these American pitchers that I need to be able to work with and talk to. And that's like, I know that's so like minute, and it's not like you don't think of that as like a factor, but like it is. Like it matters for these guys, especially catchers, to be able to communicate with their pitchers and really establish a game plan with their pitchers every single day. And all the pitchers talk about how he's a big body back there. They like throwing to him. He communicates well. He has a game plan, right? So this is the catcher for the White Sox. I think he cracks, if he's healthy and he has a good offseason, I think he cracks the opening day roster and starts opening day behind the plate, honestly.
Yeah, banged up at the end of the year, which stinks because of how well he was swinging it down the stretch where we really saw him, again, with those mechanical adjustments, getting into that backside, elevating way more and hitting the ball harder. It wasn't just the 2-mile-per-hour jump and exit velocities. His launch angle against fastballs went from 3 degrees to 14 degrees. So I'll link that thread in the episode description in case you missed it before. But just being able to get the bat in the zone longer and more geared for lift clearly resulted in a lot more slug. And over his final 30 games of the season, he slashed 310, 421, 510. So hearing that, the intangibles are there too for a 21-year-old catcher, that the blocking and receiving should continue to come along, and he can limit the running game with a 25% caught stealing rate as a pro. That's kind of continued through the higher levels. Now, finishing up with 2 lefties. Hagen Smith is a monster. We know that. There's not that much new to add here. But I think we can go shorter with Smith because he is, what is refreshing is he actually did get to make some appearances, which is nice because most of these college pitchers have not thrown at all. And we got to see him throw, what was it, about 6 2/3 innings or something like that, or 7 2/3 innings. But fastball and slider were totally there. We know that those 2 pitches are 70s, and that's why he was my favorite arm in the draft. But what are you hearing about maybe what the White Sox may be interested in doing, if anything at all, in terms of diversifying that arsenal? Because the changeup, it's flash, but I don't know if we can count on that pitch. Do they have any interest in adding a cutter and maybe doing a Garrett Crochet type of thing with him and using Crochet as a bit of an archetype? I know they're different, but there's some similarities.
I can confirm he's already working on a cutter, actually. So that is exciting. He didn't throw it much in games, I don't believe, but he is already working on the cutter. So the White Sox, basically every pitcher taken in this draft is either developing a cutter or a sinker, one way or the other. They're getting these movement fastballs depending on the guy's profile. A lot of low arm slot guys, a lot of funky release guys, and then all of them are learning cutters or sinkers. So Hagen is already working on a cutter. I've also heard that he's trying to play around with a splitter a little bit, which would be really interesting from this profile. So either one of those, if one of those clicks, it's going to be really fun to watch this guy pitch. And I have a feeling we're going to talk about Hagen Smith a lot in 2025. So we don't need to go too deep into him today because there's going to be plenty to talk about next year. But a cutter or a splitter, especially I think a cutter with that profile, I think a cutter that's in between the fastball and the slider could make him, one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. Even he's not that far off of that anyways, but it would be pretty interesting. The changeup's not bad, right? But I think having a cutter that's a good cutter too would be take him probably to the next level, and a splitter would be interesting as well.
I think that cutter will come more naturally to him too with the way he throws a slider, right? It's almost you can just manipulate off of it or just a slight grip change and throw it the same. Well, what I love too is, there's not much that we can add, and we've talked about Hagen Smith so much already, but you have 270 pitches there. Like that's going to play, and he could be a 2-pitch guy and succeed as a starter because they're so good based on, just the fact that assuming the command could be at least average, but you add that cutter there. And I think that's a game changer. And that's what I've been talking about and hoping, because that from his release, that pitch will play and it'll be that bridge, and you will not be able to separate those 3. It'll be a bridge that creates a just disgusting tunnel. And then if he can just mix in a couple decent changeups, like Crochet just throws 8 changeups a game sometimes. It's just enough to get him off the trail. My goodness, he could be a monster. And I like that, they have a similar archetype, at least close enough with the success there that they can try to kind of follow the mold with Hagen Smith.
Yeah.
Last but not least is a guy that, we've talked about so much as well. So Noah Schultz, he's probably the number 2 pitching prospect in baseball right now. At least for me, he is. He's a top lefty, and
he is most places, I think, now.
And he's a top left-handed pitching prospect. We've been high on him for a long time now. Here, I know you have, obviously. And 6'9", throwing strikes the way that he does. We've talked about that side of things ad nauseum on the podcast. But getting the run that he gets on the fastball, the slider, landing the slider for a strike at a 69% clip is outrageous when you're 6'9". And then mixing in a decent changeup. He also has that cutter that he's been throwing this year, and that pitch has performed quite well. He's been absolutely awesome. They talked about, wanting to limit his innings, and I think he's actually exceeded a little bit of
Yeah.
what they were planning, right? Which I think means that he must be feeling great, and the feedback must be extremely positive.
I mean, the great thing there is he's thrown every single start, right? He's not throwing more than 4 innings. That kind of capped him at that because he had arm injuries last year. It's such a risky profile, of course, being his length and size, right? But it's like he is gaining strength and gaining the ability to throw consistently to the point where he's made every single start on Saturday. He's been a Saturday starter. They haven't had him on a different clock. He's thrown every single Saturday this season and has looked great. He started in high A, goes to double A. The results have been as good, if not better, in double A, right? Like, I know Southern League is a little bit pitching friendly, but it's not relevant to Noah Schultz. A lot of guys, it's relevant. And you have to take it with a grain of salt. With Schultz, it's like he's just that good. The slider is one of the best in minor league baseball. The fastball's good and is still kind of getting better, I think. And that cutter is going to come along and help him a lot. I think the changeup has shown progress this year as well. I think it's still kind of a fringy pitch, but I think it's starting to develop more and being a more consistent pitch for him, especially against right-handers. So I think Schultz, I mean, there's not much more to say other than the fact that, like, if he's able to stay healthy and build up the innings next year, you're looking at one of the second best pitching prospect in baseball, and someone who is, if you can have a trio of Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith and Grant Taylor at the big league level in a few years, you're feeling pretty good.
Opponents hit 181 against him this year, 109 strikeouts, 24 walks. So they said like 75 innings ish this year. He ended up throwing mid 80s so far, and we'll see if he gets another one in there. What do you think the plan is next year for Noah Schultz? 21 years old. He did build up a little bit. He got closer to 100 innings. Like, you assume he could get a big league call up at some point, but also you're not going to do that when he's already close to an innings marker. I assume they're going to have some sort of innings limit.
Right.
Like, has there been any discussion on that? And what do you think they do?
Talk about exact numbers, but my guess would be in the 120 to 130 range. I don't think you want to push it too far, but I think he can definitely get above 100. I mean, he's still got. I think he should have another 2 starts this year, depending on how the playoffs shake out. Because I think it sounds like they may lean towards giving him a playoff start for that experience in the Southern League playoffs. So if he makes 2 more starts, you're looking at 90 innings this year. So I mean, that's a really good threshold to hit this season. And I think you can see 120 innings potentially. I wouldn't rule out a call up next year, but I also am totally okay with keeping him, with not doing that and waiting for 2026 when the team will hopefully be a little more competitive. I think it really just depends on how his innings shake out and where he's at, but he'll start in Birmingham again next year. I don't think you're going to put a guy like this in Charlotte. I think we saw it with Thorpe and some other guys that have just skipped Charlotte, and Schultz may make a few appearances there, but my guess is he'll be in Birmingham for at least the first half of the season, if not more, just to continue to work down there. And then you either get him to Chicago or you get him to Charlotte late in the year. And, either way, I think you're entering 2026 with the expectation that he's in your rotation.
Well, what I love is, he is a guy that could survive in Charlotte because he blends the swing and miss with ground balls so well.
Yes, for sure.
52% ground ball rate, 32% K rate, only 7% walk rate is just crazy. I mean, what like, just to wrap up on everything here too with Schultz too. What do you hear from like just the White Sox brass and just like when you're around the field and everything there, like they must be buzzing about this kid. And you want to toe the line of like protecting him because he's like your crown jewel, but you also want to let him go and let him. And I think they've done that really well this year, where he's probably given them that feedback, because the report was 65 to 80 innings. He's going to push towards 90. So, hey, I feel good. Let me keep going. And they let him keep going, but they're also still managing him and sticking to that plan overall. Like, they must be over the moon with this guy. And I feel like he's a big reason why they want to keep leaning into the lefty side of things.
Right. 100%.
I think is a big reason why with Crochet, how he's developed, it's like, let's keep doing this thing. And I think that's why they probably drafted Hagen Smith too.
Right. I will say this. They view him as the ace. They love Hagen Smith. They love Grant Taylor. They love a lot of these guys. The organization views this guy as the legitimate ace of the franchise, right? Like you don't want to put that on a kid, and you're not going to say that directly, but like they view him as the jewel of this pitching development. There's a lot of good pitchers in this system, and he is the number 1 guy for a reason. And they think that, they got to take it easy with him, and they don't want to push him too far, but they're prepared for him to be your next, Chris Sale level left-handed ace in Chicago, right? Like that is the hope for him. And he's capable of it. Like, we know he is. Like that's one of the best sliders you'll ever see from a minor league pitcher, and someone who I think, is viewed as the future of this franchise, to lead this core of Schultz, Hagen, Taylor, and all these other pitchers we talked about.
Just turned 21, and you don't really find command like that from a 6'9" lefty as well. So You already are late for your flight, and that's my fault. So
I'm
you
gonna
got
get
to get
there. No, we're
rolling here.
good.
Yeah, you're good. You think you're gonna make
Yeah,
it?
we're no, I'll make it. This is worth it. That's always worth talking White Sox prospects with you, Aram. Come on now.
I appreciate it, dude, and thanks for hanging on. People don't know you're on the West Coast. You woke up at like 7 a.m. to make this work, and then are already gonna have to get on your horse a little bit to get to this fight. So I really appreciate you, man. Well,
Of
next
course,
time we
man.
got you
Thank
on to
you.
talk White Sox stuff, we will have a much more simple and calming timeline here. And I am excited to get out to the fall league. We'll
Yes, for
definitely link
sure.
up there and we'll run it back on an episode then because I'm gonna need to talk to you after I watch that Grant Taylor start.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
can't wait. Like he's top of my now. Hearing that DeVries might be out there, like I'm sorry, he probably gets the edge, but I am
Fair.
really excited to see. He's probably top of my list, right up there with any of the arms that I think are going to be out there to see Grant
100%.
Taylor. But this is a fun system. It's getting better and better, and I think it's only going to continue that way. But yeah, I think we're hoping that the page can turn soon and they can start building and finding these pieces. Clearly, they have plenty of arms that can fill roles, and there's a lot to like. Again, a reminder that if you enjoyed the White Sox discussion and you do keep up with the White Sox farm, you absolutely need to go check out Future Sox and everything that Elijah Evans is doing. Check out his Twitter as well. He's on it as much as anybody. And then, of course, check out the Call Up Twitter because he's running that for us as well. But any final thoughts on the White Sox system before you go international?
The pitching is great. I can't wait for the pitching staff. You got to add some more hitters this offseason. We've talked about this so many times. Garrett Crochet trade has to involve multiple high-end hitting prospects. That is my last take. Thanks for having me on, Aram. Honestly, this is a blast. I always enjoy doing stuff like this with you.
Thanks for coming on and thanks for squeezing it in. And I agree. I can't wait to
Sure.
break down that package with you because hopefully it'll
Yeah.
be some very, very fun bats. That'll do it for this episode. Jack and I will be talking to you with a mailbag tomorrow.